Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The room buzzed with chatter, half-finished jokes, the sound of clinking coffee cups. But when Captain Kylie Rogers spoke, the air shifted. Her first officer leaned closer, respectful. The ground crew nodded politely. Yet a curious silence wrapped itself around her words, as if people weren't sure what to make of her. Not because she lacked authority. Quite the opposite. She carried a weight about her that unsettled those who didn't understand it. It was early morning at Boston Logan International, and Flight 847 was scheduled to depart on time. An ordinary eastbound crossing, Boston to London Heathrow. 6 hours across the Atlantic, 298 souls on board. For most, routine. For Kylie, nothing ever felt routine anymore. Her hands ran along the cool aluminum skin of the Airbus A350 during pre-flight, fingertips tracing rivets and seams like she was reading a story written in steel. She didn't just see an airplane. She felt it. The faint give of the nose gear, the whisper of hydraulics settling, the deep heartbeat of the twin Rolls-Royce engines waiting for life. And yet beneath her calm precision there was that flicker, a small, persistent current of unease she never admitted to anyone. She told herself it was vigilance, discipline, the residue of her training. But the truth was, sometimes she wondered if the ghosts of a different life were still trailing her, walking just behind her shadow. Her first officer, David Chen, arrived at 6:30 sharp. He was steady, methodical, eager but never careless. He respected her more than most captains he'd flown with, though he never said it out loud. Respect showed in the way he asked questions, in how he trusted her judgment without hesitation. "Weather looks clean," Chen said, scanning the reports. "A few clouds over Ireland, but we should be smooth all the way in." Kylie nodded, eyes still fixed on the navigation charts. She didn't need turbulence in the sky. She already carried enough inside her. Passengers boarded, business travelers with laptops and weary expressions, families corralling restless children, a honeymoon couple whispering excitedly in row 18. All of them unaware that the calm voice they'd soon hear over the intercom belonged to someone who had lived through things no civilian airline ever trained for. "Pre-flight complete," Kylie announced, her tone level professional. She settled into the left seat, checked systems, and let her hand hover a moment over the thrust levers. Her hand always paused there, a private ritual. She would feel the weight of choice, the responsibility of lives. Then she would push forward, engines spooling to life with a deep, rolling thunder. At 800 sharp, Flight 847 lifted into a sky brushed with the soft pink of morning. The Atlantic opened ahead, endless, glittering, deceptively calm. For 4 hours everything was smooth. The A350 hummed with mechanical confidence, systems green across the board. Kylie leaned back, eyes scanning the horizon, her voice steady in routine communications with air traffic control. Chen cracked a rare smile. "Feels like we could do this in our sleep." She forced a faint smile back, but inside she thought, "Sleep is the one place I can't go." The truth was, the silence of cruise altitude always left her with too much space for memory. And memory had sharp edges. A desert sky, the sickening spin of a stricken jet, the call sign echoing in her headset, Valkyrie 6, spoken one last time before the world went dark. She blinked, focused on the displays. She had built a new life, a new identity, a commercial captain, reliable, calm, professional. And yet, somewhere deep down, she feared it was only a disguise made of steel wings and practiced smiles. Then it happened. At 12:47 GMT, 900 nautical miles west of Ireland, the calm shattered. An amber warning light flickered on the primary flight display. One hydraulic system bleeding out. "Hydraulic 1 losing pressure," Chen reported instantly, pulling the checklist. Kylie's hands were already moving, isolating the system, transferring control to backups. Her voice steady but her pulse climbing. Hydraulic failures weren't common, but they were trained for. Manageable. She'd done it in simulators a dozen times. but less than 90 seconds later, another alarm. "Hydraulic 2, Chen said, his voice tightening. "Failing." The plane shuddered, just slightly, but enough for every muscle in Kylie's arms to register the change. The Airbus was no longer flying with the graceful ease of a modern jet. It was beginning to resist her, demanding muscle where software usually smoothed the path. She gritted her teeth, forcing the yoke into compliance. The movements were heavier now, stubborn, like dragging a beast by the reins. "Atlantic 847 heavy, declaring emergency," she transmitted. "Multiple hydraulic failures. Request priority vectors to nearest suitable airport." Her voice was even, but inside her chest a storm was rising. Shannon Control responded at once, calm but urgent. "Atlantic 847, Shannon Control. Descend and maintain flight level 240, distance 430 nautical miles. Emergency services will be standing by." Kylie acknowledged, beginning a controlled descent, but the situation was deteriorating faster than the manuals accounted for. More warnings. Electrical systems beginning to flicker, navigation displays glitching. A creeping dark across the cockpit screens. "We're losing electricals," Chen said, his voice cracking for the first time. "Backup power online, but it won't last." The air around Kylie seemed to narrow, closing in. She knew what this meant. This wasn't a textbook failure. This was a cascading collapse, a domino effect tearing through systems designed never to fail at the same time. Her grip on the controls tightened. This wasn't just commercial piloting anymore. This was muscle memory from another life, the one she wasn't supposed to have lived. The jet bucked against her hands, sluggish and stubborn. She felt sweat bead at her temples, the strain in her shoulders. Every small adjustment took effort. Every correction felt like a fight. She stole a glance at Chen. His eyes were wide, scanning, hands moving fast, but he was depending on her now. He knew it. She knew it. And for a split second, she hated the weight of that truth, hated being the one who had to hold everything together. At 14 hours, Shannon Control's voice cut through. "Atlantic 847, be advised. 2 F-22 Raptors scrambled from RAF Lakenheath. They will intercept in 12 minutes, provide escort and communication relay." For the first time since the alarms began, Kylie's heart stumbled. Raptors, U.S. fighters. She hadn't expected that. Civilian emergencies sometimes drew military support, but not like this. Not Raptors. 12 minutes later, they appeared. Sleek, predatory shadows slicing through the Atlantic sky, sliding into formation beside the wounded airliner. Their presence should have calmed her, but instead a strange chill crept up her spine. "Hawkeye 11 with 22 on your starboard," the lead pilot's voice came over the radio. "We have visual contact, Atlantic 847. Status." Kylie kept her tone flat. "Multiple hydraulic failures, electrical degradation, manual control only, 298 souls aboard, fuel 4 hours." There was a pause before the fighter pilot replied. "Copy that, we'll maintain escort." For the next 90 minutes she wrestled the beast. The Airbus fought her, sluggish on turns, resistant on descent. Her arms ached, her jaw locked, but her movement stayed precise. Calm, deliberate, efficient. It didn't go unnoticed. "Atlantic 847, Hawkeye 11 said carefully, your control inputs are exceptional. Are you former military?" Kylie felt the question like a blade pressed to her throat. She swallowed, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Negative, Hawkeye, commercial training only." Silence, then simply, "Copy." But she could almost feel their eyes on her from those Raptors, watching, wondering, seeing more than they were supposed to see. By the time Shannon's gray coastline finally appeared through scattered cloud, Kylie's body was trembling from the effort of holding the Airbus steady. She set up for final approach, every muscle remembering things she had sworn to forget. The subtle corrections, the instinctive throttle management, the way her mind scanned for threats beyond the airframe. It wasn't the way an airline captain flew. It was the way Valkyrie 6 flew. And as the wheels lined up with runway 6, she thought only one thing: keep them alive, no matter what. What did the fighter pilot see in her hands that day? From the outside, she looked like any commercial captain wrestling a crippled Airbus onto final approach. But the Raptors shadowing her knew better. They saw the precision, the muscle memory, the unmistakable rhythm of combat training bleeding through every movement she made. Shannon's runway stretched ahead, gray concrete bordered by flashing emergency lights. Fire engines and ambulances lined the tarmac waiting. Passengers sat silent in their seats, eyes wide, hands clasped, some whispering prayers. Most had no idea how close they were to disaster, but they could feel it in the tension of the air, the weight pressing against their lungs. Atlantic 847, runway 6 cleared for emergency landing, the tower called. Wind 070 at 12 knots, full emergency services standing by. "Copy," Kylie replied, her voice steady, even as sweat slid down her neck. Her left hand gripped the yoke. Her right balanced the throttles with surgical precision. The Airbus was heavy in her hands, sluggish, reluctant. Each control input felt like pushing through mud. She could sense every failure under the skin of the aircraft, hydraulics weak, electricals bleeding out, systems whispering their last. "Gear down," Chen called, pulling the lever. Nothing happened. "Manual deployment," Kylie said, eyes locked forward. Chen nodded, activating the backup system. The clunk of the gear locking into place echoed through the cabin floor. Relief swept through for a fraction of a second. "Flaps," she ordered. Again, no automation. Again, manual override. The aircraft shuddered as the control surfaces fought against what little hydraulic pressure remained. Her arms ached from the constant corrections. The crosswind tugged them right, the failing systems pulled left. She fought for balance, nudging throttle and rudder in an intricate dance. To anyone else it looked impossible. To her it was familiar, too familiar. The Raptors hovered nearby, their pilots whispering on encrypted frequencies civilians couldn't hear. "Hawkeye 11, you seeing this?" "Copy. These inputs, this isn't commercial. She's flying it like a battle-damaged strike bird." "Call sign check." A pause, silence, the kind of silence that carried weight. At 200 feet, Kylie flared, every muscle screamed. The jet groaned, metal straining, hydraulics coughing. And then impact. Tires slammed asphalt, the shock rattling through the fuselage. For a breathless moment, the Airbus wobbled, fighting her grip. "Hold it," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Her knuckles whitened. Feet pressed the rudder pedals with fierce control. She eased the throttles, applied braking manually, balancing asymmetric forces that threatened to pull them off the center line. Chen's voice cut through, ground speed decreasing, directional control steady, manual braking effective. The cabin stayed upright. The jet slowed. The runway stretched longer than it ever had before, but finally the weight eased. The aircraft rolled to a stop. Silence, thick and heavy, filled the cockpit. Then the radios erupted. "Atlantic 847, Shannon Tower. Outstanding work, Captain. All passengers safe. Emergency cruise en route." But Kylie barely heard. Her chest rose and fell with ragged breath. Her muscles trembled. She released the yoke slowly, as if letting go of the reins of a wild animal that had finally been subdued. Chen let out a nervous laugh, half shock, half relief. You just saved 300 people, Captain." Her lips pressed into a thin line. Saved them, yes, but at what cost? She had flown like Valkyrie again, and someone had noticed. On the radio, Hawkeye 11 broke formation, voice clipped, controlled. "Outstanding flying, Atlantic 847. All passengers safe. Escort terminating." But when she transmitted her final report, that old instinct slipped out. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was a moment of weakness. Or maybe it was the truth refusing to stay buried. "This is Captain Kylie Rogers," she said. Her hand trembled just slightly over the switch. "Call sign Valkyrie 6. Emergency terminated." The silence that followed wasn't normal. Seconds ticked by, too many seconds. In their cockpits, the two Raptor pilots froze. "Did you hear that?" one whispered on encrypted comms. "Affirmative, Valkyrie 6. "That's not possible. Valkyrie 6 was KIA, Operation Darkwing 2019. "Negative, listed MIA, body never recovered." Their voices dropped into hushed tones, carrying the kind of fear only men who'd read classified files could feel. The name Valkyrie wasn't supposed to exist anymore, and certainly not on the lips of a commercial airline captain. Back in the cabin, passengers erupted into applause. The kind of applause that comes not from politeness but from the raw relief of still being alive. The sound rattled through the fuselage, hollow but thunderous. Kylie forced herself to stand when the evacuation procedures began. She smiled, reassured, her calm voice guiding terrified passengers down inflatable slides and into waiting buses. She shook hands, offered nods, played the role of steady captain. But inside, her stomach twisted. She had let it slip. By the time the last passenger left, she remained in the cockpit, running checklists out of habit. Alone, she placed her hands flat against the darkened displays, as if trying to press her heartbeat into the machine that had carried them through. It had betrayed her, yes, but it had also given her cover she might have just lost. Hours later, in a quiet hotel room at Shannon, the knock came. Sharp, authoritative, not airline staff, not local police, something heavier. She opened the door to find a woman in uniform. Colonel Patricia Harrison, U.S. Air Force Special Operations Command. "Captain Rogers," the colonel said, eyes cool, voice clipped. "We need to discuss your transmission." Kylie's stomach tightened. She kept her face neutral. "Transmission." The colonel stepped inside without waiting for permission. "You identified yourself with the call sign Valkyrie 6. "That must have been a misread," Kylie replied evenly. "Stress, static, my systems were failing." But Harrison didn't blink. She set a file on the table, classified stamps across every page. She opened it slowly, revealing photographs, mission logs, after-action reports, all names blacked out except one. Lieutenant Colonel Kylie Rogers, Valkyrie 6, missing in action, presumed dead. Harrison's voice lowered, carrying the weight of secrets not meant to be spoken aloud. "Official records say you died in Syria, October 2019. Your aircraft was never recovered. No body, no trace." Kylie's jaw clenched. For years she had lived with the silence, the lie that kept her alive, the false grave, the erased name. "I fly for Atlantic Airways," she said firmly. "That's all I've done for 5 years." Harrison studied her, eyes narrowing. "Your flying today was exceptional, too exceptional. The F-22 pilots noted techniques only seen in classified programs you shouldn't know exist." Kylie turned away, staring out the hotel window at the rain streaking the glass. Her reflection stared back, tired, pale, eyes shadowed by truths she could never say. Finally she whispered, "Sometimes in the air old instincts return. That doesn't mean they define me anymore." But the colonel's words lingered in the room like smoke. "Call signs don't return by accident. Valkyrie 6 doesn't just slip out. You know that as well as I do." Kylie said nothing. Silence was safer. Outside, rain lashed the tarmac where Flight 847 still sat crippled. A monument to survival. A monument to the past she couldn't bury. And far above, 2 Raptors streaked back toward base, their pilots still whispering over encrypted lines, reporting up the chain. The name Valkyrie 6 had been spoken again, and there were those in power who would not let it pass unanswered. Why had she said it out loud? She kept asking herself that as the colonel's words replayed in her head. Valkyrie 6. That call sign had been buried, sealed under classified files and whispered in halls where sunlight never reached. She had built an entire life on keeping it hidden, and yet, in one exhausted breath, she had let it escape. Colonel Harrison stood in her hotel room like a shadow cast from the past, unmoving, patient. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't threatened. She didn't need to. Her silence pressed heavier than the weight of any accusation. Kylie sat stiff on the edge of the bed, hands locked together, as if squeezing hard enough could keep her secret from spilling further. "You understand what you've done," the colonel finally said, voice steady. Kylie's reply was almost a whisper. "I don't know what you mean." "You do." Harrison opened the file again, sliding it across the table. A grainy photograph stared up at Kylie. Desert sand, a wreckage burning in the distance, and a pilot's helmet lying broken in the dirt. Her throat tightened. She hadn't seen that image in years. She hadn't wanted to. "That was the last evidence we had," the colonel continued. "The moment Valkyrie 6 disappeared, officially you were gone, buried in the records, a line in a report. For reasons above both of us, that was the narrative chosen. Dead, erased, a ghost." Kylie's jaw locked. "Then leave me a ghost." "You know it doesn't work that way." Silence stretched. The rain outside tapped against the glass like impatient fingers. Kylie wanted to scream. She wanted to tell the colonel she didn't care about classified files, about after-action reports, about a past that had already taken too much. She wanted to demand the right to just fly her routes, drink her coffee, greet passengers with a practiced smile, and live like the rest of the world did, untouched by the darkness she had once walked through. But the colonel's eyes pinned her in place, steady, knowing. "You don't have to admit it," Harrison said quietly. "We already know. The question is whether you understand what comes next." Kylie shook her head slowly. "What comes next is me returning to work, flying my schedule, nothing more." The colonel didn't laugh. She simply closed the file with deliberate care. "You think the Air Force, the Pentagon, the agencies will ignore the fact that Valkyrie 6 resurfaced today, that F-22 pilots reported seeing maneuvers straight out of black programs. You've stirred waters you can't calm." Kylie's pulse hammered in her ears. She wanted to deny it, but she remembered the Raptors' voices, that long pause, the encrypted whispers she wasn't supposed to hear, the way they had stopped cold when she spoke her call sign. The past had reached out its hand, and she had taken it. Finally, she found her voice. "If I was Valkyrie 6, if I had been part of those missions, why keep me alive then? Why erase me, just to drag me back years later?" The colonel studied her for a long moment, then said softly, "Because ghosts don't get to choose when they haunt." Kylie looked down at her hands. They were trembling. She pressed them hard against her knees until the shaking stopped. "Tell me what you want from me," she said, her voice brittle. Harrison leaned closer. "What I want is irrelevant. What matters is that others will want more than you can give. Some will see a liability, some will see an asset, and both will come looking." The words sank into Kylie like ice water. She had always known this moment might come. For years she had lived balanced on the knife edge between two lives, one visible, one erased. But she had hoped foolishly, desperately, that the world had forgotten. The colonel rose, adjusting her uniform. "You should sleep. Tomorrow will come quickly." And then she left, the door clicking shut with a finality that felt like a verdict. Sleep never came. Kylie lay staring at the ceiling, the hum of the hotel radiator filling the silence. Her mind replayed the day in fragments, the flickering warning lights, the fight for control, the Raptors sliding into formation, the weight of 300 lives pressing against her shoulders. And then, that moment, her voice, the call sign she thought she had buried under years of silence. Why had she said it? Fatigue, instinct, or something deeper, a part of her that refused to stay hidden? She turned over, pressing her face into the pillow, willing herself to forget. But memory had its own agenda. It carried her back. Desert sky, blinding sun, the roar of an engine choking, flames in the air, a voice in her headset, Valkyrie 6, brake left, then static, then nothing. She jolted upright, breath ragged, skin damp. 5 years and still the images came. Still the ghosts whispered. She pulled open the hotel desk drawer, found the notepad inside. She stared at the blank page, pen trembling in her hand. She wanted to write it down, to pour it out. Instead, she scrawled one word, pressing so hard the tip tore the paper. Valkyrie. Then she shoved the pen away and buried her face in her hands. By morning, the official recognition had already begun. Atlantic Airways hailed her as a hero. News outlets carried headlines about the captain who landed a crippled airliner without losing a single life. Passengers gave interviews, praising her calm, her skill, her steadiness in the storm. She smiled for the cameras, accepted the handshakes, played the role. But behind the polite congratulations, she felt the gaze, not of the public, of the unseen, of those who had files marked with red stamps and black bars. She knew her name was being spoken in rooms she'd hoped never to be mentioned in again. That evening, her chief pilot approached her with admiration in his voice. "Exceptional performance, Kylie. The board is considering commendation. Your work saved nearly 300 lives." She thanked him, gave the standard reply about crew resource management, about following procedures. But his next words sliced close. "Where did you learn those manual techniques? Most pilots would have frozen. You didn't." Kylie forced a smile. "I've always been interested in advanced training. Old habits, maybe." He nodded, but the curiosity lingered in his eyes. That night she walked the Shannon tarmac alone. The Airbus sat crippled under floodlights, mechanics swarming it like ants. She reached out, touched the scarred fuselage. A survivor like her, but machines didn't remember. People did. And she knew others would remember her now. 3 weeks later, the first letter arrived. No sender, no return address. Just a single line typed neatly in black ink. Valkyrie 6, ghosts don't stay buried. Her hands shook as she held the page. The edges cut against her skin. She burned it in her kitchen sink, watching the flames curl the paper into ash. But the words remained, echoing in her chest. And in the silence of her small apartment, she whispered to herself, almost pleading, almost angry, "I'm not Valkyrie anymore. I can't be." But the sky has a way of remembering, and some names, once spoken, refuse to be silenced. Why did the silence in her apartment feel louder than the roar of engines? Kylie sat at her kitchen table, the remains of the burned letter still smoldering in the sink, the acrid smoke clinging to the air. She had destroyed the paper, but she couldn't destroy what it meant. Someone new, someone outside the chain of command, someone who had reached into her civilian life, slipped through the cracks she thought were sealed. She pressed her palms flat against the table, forcing them to stop trembling. Her breathing slowed, shallow, deliberate. She told herself she had been careful. 5 years of routines, 5 years of separation, 5 years of being just another airline captain. No trail, no leaks, no contacts. But ghosts didn't send letters. People did. People who wanted her to remember what she had spent years trying to forget. The knock on the door startled her so sharply she nearly overturned her chair. 3 firm raps, authority in the rhythm. She froze, every instinct screaming caution. When she opened the door, it was Colonel Harrison this time. It was a man in civilian clothes, early 50s, hair cut too sharp to belong to anyone outside the service. He held a badge she didn't recognize at first glance, not military, not police, something else. "Captain Rogers," he said, his tone flat. "May I come in?" Her eyes flicked to the badge again. Black border, no agency name, just a seal she knew better than to question. Intelligence, the kind that lived in shadows. She let him in without a word. He stepped inside, eyes scanning the room, not with curiosity but with assessment, as if cataloging every detail, every exit. "You've attracted attention," he said simply. Kylie folded her arms. "I already know that." He studied her, unblinking. "The name you spoke on the radio, Valkyrie 6. Do you understand the weight of that name?" Her voice came out colder than she intended. "Better than you." A thin smile tugged at his lips, humorless. "Then you know why I'm here. Your call sign wasn't just a designation. It was a signal, and signals echo in places you don't want them to." She turned away, staring out the window at the city lights. "I didn't mean to say it. It slipped." "Slips don't exist," he replied. "Not with names like that. Someone will interpret it as intentional, and that complicates things." She clenched her fists, nails biting into her palms. "So what now? You drag me back, rewrite my obituary, pretend I never sat in that cockpit." The man's silence was answer enough. Finally he said, "You saved 300 lives. Admirable. But you also lit a flare that can't be unseen. There are files moving now. Reviews, debates. Some want you back in. Some want you erased more thoroughly. Neither option leaves you untouched." Kylie spun around, anger flaring sharp. "I'm not going back, do you hear me? I left that world buried in the sand. I've built something else, something normal." He tilted his head, almost pitying. "Normal doesn't exist for people like you. You knew that the day you accepted the call sign." She wanted to shout at him. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she had carved out her own life, one flight, one passenger manifest at a time. But deep down in the quiet corners of her soul, she knew he was right. She had always felt it in the way other pilots looked at her, in the way passengers sometimes sensed her edge. She wasn't like them. She couldn't be. The man stood, slipping the badge back into his pocket. "I'll leave you with advice. Stop pretending the past won't catch up. It always does." And then he was gone. For days she tried to push it away. She threw herself into routine flights, transatlantic crossings that blurred into one another. The announcements, the checklists, the steady rhythm of the engines. On the surface she was composed, but every time her hand touched the yoke she felt the ghost stir. Every time she glanced at the horizon she heard the echo of voices long gone. Passengers noticed her calm, her professionalism. They smiled as they left the plane, grateful for her steadiness. But she wondered if they could see past the uniform, past the practiced smile, into the storm brewing beneath. One night halfway across the Atlantic, she caught her reflection in the cockpit glass. The dim glow of instruments painted her face, the dark ocean stretched beyond. And for a moment she didn't see Captain Kylie Rogers. She saw Valkyrie 6, helmeted, focused, flying into fire. She turned away quickly, throat tight. Meanwhile the reports spread. The F-22 pilot's debrief had made its way up the chain of command. Their words were cautious, coded but unmistakable. Civilian pilot demonstrated advanced control techniques consistent with black program training. Observed maneuvers not part of commercial syllabus. Self-identified as Valkyrie 6. Those lines were enough. Enough to spark quiet meetings in secure rooms. Enough to dust off files stamped MIA presumed dead. Enough to send ripples through corridors where her name had not been spoken in 5 years. Some argued she should be recovered, brought back into the fold. Some insisted she remained too great a liability, a breach of operational security walking in plain sight, a ghost that should have stayed buried. And in those debates, one truth became clear. She had no control over which way the tide would pull her. Back in her apartment, she found another envelope one evening. This one wasn't typed. The handwriting was sharp, deliberate. She hesitated before opening it, her pulse hammering. Inside was a single photograph, not of her, not of the Airbus. A photograph of a wreckage, the wreckage, her old aircraft twisted and burned into the desert earth, and scrawled across the back 3 words. They never stopped. Her knees nearly buckled. She dropped the photo onto the table, hands trembling. Whoever was sending these wasn't just threatening. They knew details buried deep in classified vaults, details no civilian should have touched. For the first time in years, she felt real fear crawl cold up her spine, not for herself, but for what it meant. Because if someone else knew about Valkyrie 6, then her survival wasn't just her secret anymore. It was leverage, a weapon. And in the world she had escaped, weapons never stayed unused for long. The next morning, she met Colonel Harrison again, not by invitation, by inevitability. Harrison was waiting outside the crew lounge when Kylie reported for duty, uniform pressed, bag slung over her shoulder. "Captain Rogers," the colonel greeted evenly, "we need to talk." Kylie didn't slow her stride. "I have a flight to London." "It's been reassigned. You're grounded until further notice." The words hit like a physical blow. She stopped, heart racing, eyes narrowing. On whose authority? Mine and higher. Passengers bustled past, oblivious. Kylie stood rooted, fighting the urge to lash out, to demand answers, but she knew what that would do. Attention was the last thing she could afford. Harrison leaned in, voice dropping. "You think you can ignore this, walk away again? You can't, not this time." Kylie's jaw clenched. "Then what are you here to tell me? That I belong to you again? That my life is no longer mine?" The colonel's eyes softened just slightly. "I'm here to tell you that you're not safe, and the longer you pretend otherwise, the more dangerous it gets." For a moment, neither moved. The world around them bustled, oblivious. But in that silence, Kylie felt the walls of her carefully built life closing in. She whispered almost to herself, "I can't go back." Harrison's reply was barely audible. "Then prepare for them to come to you." That night, Kylie sat alone in her apartment, lights dim, blinds drawn. Her logbook lay open on the table, page after page of flights. Boston to Heathrow, New York to Paris, routine crossings, neat signatures, the tidy life she had carved out. She stared at the pages, willing herself to believe in them, to believe she could stay this person, this captain, this ordinary woman who flew people safely across oceans. But the name echoed again. Valkyrie, Valkyrie, Valkyrie. And somewhere deep down, she wondered if maybe ghosts didn't just haunt. Maybe sometimes they called you back. Why were they watching her now, after 5 years of silence? Kylie asked herself that as she walked through Logan's crowded terminal, suitcase rolling behind her, uniform pressed, face composed. To the world, she was just another airline captain moving toward her gate. To her, every pair of eyes in the crowd felt like a question. Who knew? Who was looking too long? Who had seen her name on a page it was never supposed to touch? Her grounding order had technically lifted that morning. The airline framed it as rest after an extraordinary incident, the kind of line passengers and colleagues accepted without digging deeper. But Kylie knew it wasn't rest. It was a pause, a test to see what she would do. So she went back to work, not because she felt safe, but because routine was the only mask she had left. When she reached the jet bridge, her first officer was waiting, smiling like it was any other flight. She returned it, thin but believable. The crew briefed, the passengers boarded, and the Airbus hummed to life under her hands. But as she taxied toward the runway, she noticed something in the sky. Not unusual traffic, not a scheduled escort. A gray tail, military, too high to identify but circling, watching. Her chest tightened. The mask slipped for a heartbeat before she forced it back into place. Hours later, at cruise altitude over the Atlantic, the autopilot held steady. Her first officer flipped through the flight plan. The cabin hummed with the soft murmur of passengers settling into the long crossing. And yet Kylie felt it again, that prickle at the back of her neck, the sense of eyes on her. She turned slightly, staring out into the endless blue, and there far off a glint, too distant for passengers to notice but unmistakable to her, a fighter, keeping pace, silent, just beyond the edge of visibility. Her breath slowed. She didn't mention it to Chen, didn't break the silence. She just kept her gaze forward, hands resting lightly on the yoke, eyes calm even as her mind spun. They weren't letting her go. Back on the ground in London, she barely had time to breathe before she saw the envelope, slipped under her hotel door, plain, unmarked. Her fingers hesitated before tearing it open. Inside, a single page, a list of names, 6 names, all familiar, all once part of operations that didn't exist, names she hadn't spoken in half a decade. At the bottom, 2 words. Only you. Her knees weakened. She sat heavily on the bed, staring at the paper until her vision blurred. The list wasn't random. It was her squad, her flight, the ones who had gone into Darkwing with her, the ones she had believed were gone. If someone had these names, it meant the past wasn't buried. It meant pieces of it were still moving. It meant she wasn't the only ghost. Her hands clenched the page. Her first thought wasn't anger or fear. It was guilt. She had survived. They hadn't. Why her? Why only her? The next day she was summoned again. Not by Harrison this time, by someone higher. The meeting was in a secure facility outside London, the kind of place buried under layers of routine government offices, invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look. She walked past checkpoints, metal detectors, silent guards whose eyes gave nothing away. Inside a sterile conference room, 3 people waited. Harrison was there, arms crossed, silent. Beside her, a man in a tailored suit, intelligence, polished, sharp. And at the head of the table, a general, his face lined, his eyes piercing. "Kylie Rogers," he said without greeting, "or should I say Valkyrie 6? Her jaw tightened. She didn't reply. The general leaned forward, folding his hands. "You've put us in a difficult position. The call sign you used, intentional or not, has stirred attention far beyond this room. Attention we'd rather not have." She kept her gaze steady, then erased it again. His lips twitched, almost a smile. If only it were that simple. There are forces watching, both foreign and domestic, who take great interest in that name. Some of them enemies, some not. "And what do you want from me?" she asked flatly. The man in the suit spoke for the first time. "Cooperation, information. You have knowledge of operations we cannot acknowledge in public record, but knowledge nonetheless. If those memories surface outside controlled channels, they become liabilities. We need to be sure you are contained." Kylie's voice sharpened. "I'm not a liability. I'm a pilot. I've done nothing but fly passengers for 5 years." The general's gaze hardened. "And yet when your aircraft failed, you flew like a combat veteran under fire. You revealed yourself. You reminded the world Valkyrie exists. That cannot be undone." Her pulse hammered. "So what are you saying? That I have no life? That I'm condemned to be your secret forever?" The room went silent. The weight of truth hung heavy. Finally Harrison spoke, softer than the others. "We're saying you have a choice. Either you continue under our watch, your life shadowed but safe, or you disappear again, permanently this time." The word hung in the air, disappear. Kylie stared at them, rage simmering beneath her calm. "You erased me once. I won't let you do it again." The general rose. "Then understand this, you are not free, not anymore. Every flight you take, every word you speak will be measured. Because the moment Valkyrie 6 resurfaced, you stopped being just Kylie Rogers. You became something else. A story, a threat, a symbol." He left without another word, the man in the suit following. Only Harrison remained, watching her with an expression Kylie couldn't read. Finally the colonel said, "They'll push. Harder than you expect. Decide now what you're willing to hold onto, and what you're willing to lose." Then she too walked out, leaving Kylie alone in the sterile silence. That night she sat in her hotel room, staring at the list of names again. The squad, her squad, 6 ghosts, and the words "only you." She thought about the general's threat, about the intelligence officer's cold assessment, about Harrison's warning. She thought about the fighter circling silently at 30,000 feet. She thought about passengers clapping in relief, never knowing how close they'd come to death. And she thought about the wreckage, the fire, the last voice she'd heard on that mission. Valkyrie 6 brake left. Her hands shook as she pressed them to her face. The weight of survival pressed harder than any hydraulic failure, any failing system. She had carried it for years, and now it was closing in again. For the first time since she'd left the desert behind, she allowed herself to whisper it into the dark. I shouldn't have lived. The words hung in the air, sharp and bitter, but somewhere beneath them, another voice, quieter, stubborn. But you did. And maybe that meant something. Maybe survival wasn't just chance. Maybe it was a purpose she hadn't yet faced. The next morning, she checked out of the hotel. Her bag was light, but her shoulders were heavy. As she walked through the lobby, she caught sight of a man reading a newspaper in the corner. He wasn't reading. He was watching. Their eyes met. He gave the faintest nod. Her pulse spiked. She looked away, walked faster. But she knew the truth now. She was being followed, tracked, watched. And she couldn't tell anymore if it was her own government or someone else. Why did the photograph feel like a countdown? It sat in the bottom drawer of her hotel desk, folded once, then twice, the edges softened by worry and handling. She told herself she would throw it away. She told herself she would ignore it. Yet each time she closed her eyes, the image rose again. Charred metal in a desert stillness, the shadow of a wing like a question mark burned into sand. Whoever had taken that photograph had been close, close enough to watch the wreck die and keep a record of it, close enough to know who survived. Kylie had been careful for 5 years, but careful had a way of fraying. A tiny thread snagged on a memory, and suddenly the whole thing began to unravel. She should have been able to trust that people who had buried her didn't leave breadcrumbs. But the breadcrumbs had been laid, bright as railway ties, and someone was following the track. She moved through London with a practiced calm that hid the tremor under her skin. Her passport slid through the gate, her badge clicked in the cockpit door. The world expected professionalism. It never asked the question she woke with, am I the only one left? The long flight to Doha felt like a transit through glass. Cabin lights dimmed. 1,000 tiny suns reflected on sleeping faces. Engines thrummed like a heartbeat. She watched the instrument panel and felt an old rhythm in her palms, a cadence that matched training, terror, triumph, the odd trio of feelings that had kept her alive. At 03:47, when most of the world slept, the intercom in the flight deck chattered. An encrypted tone, a sound that cut through autopilot complacency. Her hand hovered above the radio, every muscle tensed. This was not a maintenance ping, not a weather update. The signal was sharp, precise, and it used a frequency neither civilian air traffic nor ordinary military used. Atlantic 847, this is Hawkeye 11, the voice said, but it was different, lower, filtered. Not a greeting, a rendezvous. We need to speak secure. Vector 30 at flight level 220 when you reach waypoint Sierra 3. Kylie's throat tightened. The Raptor again. Not unseen now, but purposeful. Someone wanted them to meet. Her first officer, Chen, looked to her for instruction. She met his eyes and gave the smallest of shakes, comply. There was no point in making enemies when they were already watching. They adjusted course, an invisible choreography with a craft whose pilots had more to lose than most people could imagine. The Atlantic stretched beneath like ink. The meeting point was a place where the sky of commerce and the sky of combat overlapped, neither jurisdiction quite owning the air. When the fighter arrived, it did not come roaring with gestures. It slipped in like a shadow folding into the wings, almost apologetic for the attention it drew. The call sign was familiar. The voice was not the same as before. This time it was harder, edged with a controlled urgency that didn't try to overcompensate with diplomacy. Valkyrie, the voice said, and for a moment something inside Kylie eased in a way she hadn't allowed in months. Even the name tasted like old metal and long nights. We need to talk. Not here. We'll escort you to a secure airfield. Expect ground transport. Her heart did something she did not intend. Quick, hot, oddly grateful. A rescue, perhaps, or a trap. The two had shared a very thin line between them for years. The escorted landing at a small RAF base was clinical and efficient. Engines idled, emergency services watched but did not intervene. A vehicle waited unmarked, armored with men whose faces betrayed nothing. They led her into a windowless room cooled to an antiseptic chill. No lights, only a screen and chairs. A loop of classified files spun in her mind like hungry wolves. A man entered, not a general this time, not a colonel. A civilian suit, hair peppered with gray, eyes that had probably read more secrets than she had ever imagined. He introduced himself as Mr. Adler. "We have questions," he said. "We want to know why Valkyrie is visible again." Kylie braced herself. She had lived through debriefings where the questions were sharper than knives. She had expected facts, not philosophy. Yet Mr. Adler's voice slid between both. He looked at her a moment too long, as if he were weighing whether to tell her the truth or spare her pain. "We didn't lose just an aircraft in 2019, he said finally. "We lost a doctrine. Valkyrie 6 was the apex of a capability designed to change how we operated in denied airspace. When you vanished, an entire set of assumptions vanished with you. Some of us thought that was safer. Others thought it was a mistake." The words landed cold. Doctrine, apex, assumptions. They were abstractions for bureaucrats, but for her they were bones and blood. She had been a person within a machine, not a policy. "So why is my name a problem now?" she asked. She had to find footing, otherwise intellect would be swallowed by accusations. "Because the world changed," Mr. Adler said. "Because adversaries evolved. Because some people who liked the idea of a Valkyrie in the darkness are back to dreaming about what she could do if she remained operational. And because you, specifically, can no longer be assumed to be a benign civilian." Inside her, a small, hot part of her bristled. "I'm not a weapon," she said. "I'm a pilot. I save people." Mr. Adler's face didn't give feedback. "Perhaps you did today, but capability is complicated. Capability becomes a political lever the moment it is demonstrated. Whoever has a Valkyrie has advantage. Whoever sees Valkyrie become public knowledge loses that advantage. So we protect our advantage, or we render the weapon." His hand made a cutting motion, "too costly to use." Kylie felt the room tilt. Render too costly. Erase. She had heard euphemisms before. They had always led the same places. Silence, isolation, a burial in paperwork and forgotten bases. She had promised herself that would not happen again. "And if I refuse?" she asked, rage and steel mixing in her voice. "If I refuse to be moved like some pawn?" Mr. Adler's eyes were quiet, almost bored. "Then you become unpredictable, and unpredictability is dangerous." She thought of the photograph, the names, the scar of the wreckage that the world pretended not to see. She thought of passengers who had clapped for her, of the applause that had been more for survival than for heroism. She thought of Chen, naive enough to trust her but loyal enough to follow. Her chest hardened. "If you want me controlled," she said, "you'll have to break me." Adler's smile was a tiny, unreadable thing. "We don't break people we need. We contain risks. We give them tasks. You could help us ensure Valkyrie remains an asset and not an embarrassment. Or you could make enemies of people who have no reason to be merciful." The offer smelled like no choice at all. Cooperation under surveillance. A life under glass. The man might dress it in rational policy language, but the undertone was the same. The world would not let her be a simple airline captain any longer. Back in her hotel that night, she dreamed of deserts and burn marks, and the feel of a canopy sliding closed over her head. Dreams that always began with voices, commands, and ended with silence. She woke with the taste of diesel and smoke in her mouth. Her phone buzzed with a single message, an address and a time. No sender. Her hands tightened. Someone wanted to meet. Someone was dangling bait. The choice had narrowed like a funnel. She went anyway, not because she trusted the sender, but because decisions made in the light were better than those made in the dark. If she was to be drawn back in, she wanted to walk the path with eyes open. The meeting place was a hangar on the edge of a municipal airport, old, smelling of oil and history, with lights slanting in through dust. Inside, a man stood amid a disassembled airframe he had restored to a hollow echo of flight. He was mid-40s, hands scarred by work. He introduced himself as Marco. "I knew Valkyrie," he said simply. "Not from files. I knew her in the air." Kylie's heart stuttered. "Who are you?" "I'm someone who watches," Marco said. "I watched you land twice, and I watched the men who send letters." He lifted a cloth, revealing a wooden crate with gadgets and a small radio. "They're not the only ones who noticed. People remember differently." They talked until the light in the hangar thinned into evening. Marco told stories of nights in desert sands where men taught young pilots to bend the sky. He spoke of betrayal, of doctrine sold to men who would weaponize memory. He showed black market satellite images, grainy but telling. He showed intercepted chatter that validated the list of names. "You can trust me," he said finally, "or at least you can use what I know." Kylie wanted to doubt him, to fold back into the safety of suspicion. But there was a way his voice delivered facts that didn't brag, it only recorded. A journalist's tone mixed with a mechanic's patience. He had assembled fragments, and in the quiet of that hangar, they built a shape. "You think someone hunting the rest of them," she said, "and I'm the only one left." Marco shrugged. "Either you're the only one left or you're the only one who landed. Either way, you're the door." She pressed her forehead to her palm. The ache was not just fatigue. It was the old weight of responsibility she had tried to give away. It had a way of collecting in her bones, settling into the marrow. "You can either let them take everything," Marco said, gentle and firm, "or you can learn to fight back in ways they won't expect." Fight back. The phrase tasted foreign and hot. She had fled battle because she wanted to build a life that was counted in routes and passenger manifests, not in raids and reconnaissance. But choices had a way of being made for you. Survival sometimes required returning to the thing that had made you survive in the first place. She looked at the tools in the crate, frequencies, tracers, small devices that could ghost movements and mask signals. They were not weapons in the obvious sense. They were ways to be invisible when necessary, to move without leading, to be an instrument of misdirection instead of a blunt object for others to claim. Kylie realized then that she would not allow them to bury her a second time. If Valkyrie 6 was a name that meant anything, it could either be a chain or a shield. She chose the shield, not for glory, for the people she had sworn to protect, for the passengers who slept like children under her wings, for the ghosts who lay unremembered in foreign sand. She had a decision to make, and for the first time since the wreck, the decision felt like one she could own. Not because it would be easy, but because it was hers. Outside the hangar, dusk thickened into a dark that smelled like change. Above, the sky held the thin memory of daylight, and somewhere beyond the clouds, a fighter plane tracked an unknown signature. The world was listening. Valkyrie was awake. Why did it feel like every choice was already made for her? Kylie stood in the hangar's dim light, her hand resting on the edge of the crate Marco had opened. The smell of oil and metal clung to the air. A hollow aircraft skeleton loomed behind him, its ribs casting long shadows across the floor. He had given her tools, not orders. Options, not ultimatums. Yet even as she looked at the radio equipment, the tracers, the masking devices, she felt the invisible push of inevitability. "You know what they'll do," Marco said. His voice was calm, almost resigned. "If you let them, they'll fold you into a program you never asked to rejoin. If you resist, they'll erase you. And if you stay in between, they'll let someone else decide your fate." Kylie pressed her lips together. "And you're offering what? Freedom?" "No," Marco replied. "I'm offering leverage. Freedom doesn't exist in our world, but leverage can keep you alive long enough to make your own terms. She hated that he was right. That night back in her flat, she spread the contents of the crate across her table. The devices looked unremarkable to anyone else. A transceiver with a worn dial, a box of small black chips, a set of cables, notebooks scrawled with coded frequencies. But to her, it was familiar language. The hum of clandestine comms, the vocabulary of signals and silence. She ran her fingers across the notebook. Numbers leapt at her, old training coming alive in her mind without permission. She could almost hear the voices again, back in that other life. Voices calling, guiding, demanding. Her stomach knotted. She had worked so hard to bury that muscle memory, to live as if she was only Captain Rogers, calm and professional, safe in her cocoon of commercial routine. But the cocoon had split, and now she was something she couldn't name. The next day she flew again, Boston to Paris this time. Routine, smooth, but her eyes kept sliding to the horizon, to the edges of the sky where shadows could slip unnoticed. And there they were again. Not Raptors this time, but something smaller, faster, harder to see. She didn't point them out to Chen. She didn't need to. She knew the watchers were always there now. When the wheels kissed the Paris runway and passengers applauded, she smiled her practiced smile. But her chest felt hollow. Every safe landing now was only another reminder that someone might not want her to keep landing at all. 3 days later, Marco returned. He brought no pretense, no disguise, just walked into her life again like he had never left. "They're tightening around you," he said without greeting. "Your name's moving in channels it hasn't touched since Darkwing. Files are being pulled. People are asking questions they shouldn't." She swallowed. "And the list you gave me, the others?" His eyes lowered. "Gone, all but one. And that one's missing, maybe running, which means you're the only visible one." Her pulse quickened. "Why give me their names, then, just to remind me I'm alone?" "No," Marco said softly, "to remind you that survival wasn't random. You were meant to walk out of that desert. Someone chose that." Kylie's breath caught. She shook her head violently. "No, don't twist this into destiny. It wasn't anything but luck." Marco didn't argue. He just let the silence hang until it hurt. That night another envelope appeared under her door. The same sharp handwriting, the same chill of recognition. Inside, no photograph this time, just a line. "The desert remembers." Her knees buckled. She sat on the edge of her bed, the paper trembling in her hands. She knew what it meant. Someone out there, someone alive, was reminding her that the wreck she thought had erased her still lived in memory. And worse, that memory was coming back to life. Colonel Harrison found her 2 mornings later. Not in a hotel, not in a conference room, but on the tarmac itself. Kylie was walking out for a routine flight when she heard the clipped footsteps, felt the weight of presence before she turned. "Captain Rogers," Harrison said, her voice low, measured. "We need to talk now." Kylie gestured to her crew. "I have a flight." "Not today you don't," Harrison replied. "They've reassigned it. You're coming with me." The colonel didn't wait for argument. She turned, expecting Kylie to follow. And she did, though every instinct screamed at her not to. Inside a quiet office overlooking the airfield, Harrison closed the blinds. "You've been contacted," she said simply. Kylie froze. "By who?" "Don't play," Harrison snapped. "We know someone's reaching out. We know you've seen something." Kylie wanted to deny it, to shrug, to dismiss, but the colonel's eyes bored into her. And in that moment she realized denial wasn't safety anymore. It was just another trap. So she said nothing. Harrison leaned closer. "Listen carefully. The people who want you visible again are not your allies. They'll use you until you break. And when you break, they'll make sure you vanish permanently." Kylie's voice was steady but low. "And what do you want, Colonel? For me to vanish on your terms instead?" Harrison's face softened for a fleeting second. "I want you alive, but I can't protect you if you keep walking alone." The words landed heavier than the threats had. That night sleep didn't come. She sat by her window staring at the city lights. Every car horn sounded like a warning, every passing shadow like a signal. The paper still lay on her desk, whispering its words. The desert remembers. She thought of the wreckage again. The heat, the fire, the silence afterward. She thought of the voices she'd never hear again. And she thought of one voice in particular, the one that had called her call sign in the last seconds. Valkyrie 6 brake left. She pressed her palms to her eyes until colors burst behind them. She wanted to forget, but forgetting had been taken from her. The next day, Marco contacted her again. No envelope this time. A direct call to a number she hadn't given him. "They're moving," he said. "Not just watching, preparing. The list wasn't just memory, it was a warning. Someone's hunting what's left of Darkwing, and you're the only one in the open." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Why me?" "Because you lived," Marco said simply. "And because they think you know something you don't even realize you know." Her breath hitched. She wanted to argue, to demand answers. But instead she felt a slow, dawning truth. Maybe he was right. Maybe survival hadn't been an accident. Maybe the desert hadn't let her go for a reason. That evening, Kylie found herself back in the hangar. The crate still sat on the floor. The tools still waited. Marco stood in the shadows, arms folded. "You have to decide," he said quietly. "Do you want to run or do you want to fight?" She stared at him, her hands trembling. "I wanted neither. I just wanted to live." Marco nodded, not unkindly. "Then live, but live on your terms, not theirs." Her eyes dropped to the crate, to the devices that could hide her, protect her, make her invisible again. And for the first time since the wreck, she let herself admit it. Maybe she didn't just want to live. Maybe she wanted to make sure the ghosts she carried weren't erased in vain. She lifted the radio from the crate, the weight familiar, heavy in her hands. "Then I fight," she whispered. Why did the night feel so still, as if the world was holding its breath? Kylie stood in the hangar, the radio warm in her hands, its weight heavier than its metal frame. Marco watched her with a quiet patience, his eyes reflecting both urgency and understanding. She knew the choice was already made. She had lifted the radio. She had spoken the words, "Then I fight." And once spoken, there was no retreat. But fighting meant more than survival now. It meant stepping back into a story she had spent years trying to forget. A story others wanted to use. A story some wanted to erase. The first signal came 3 nights later. Not on her phone, not in an envelope, but through the radio itself. A faint burst of static, then a coded phrase only someone from Darkwing would know. Her blood ran cold hearing it. "Raven's fire is not out." The phrase had been theirs. A call used in the darkest hours of the mission. A promise that no matter how bad it got, someone was still fighting. Her hands trembled as she set the dial, answering with her own call. Not Valkyrie. Not yet. Just a number sequence, a ghost of a reply. The answer came swiftly. A voice, broken, faint, but alive. "Kylie, is it you?" Her chest constricted. The sound was rough, aged, scarred by time and distance. But she knew it. She knew it down to her marrow. "Elias," she whispered. Silence, then, "They told me everyone else was gone." Her vision blurred. For years she had carried the weight of being the only survivor. For years she had believed she alone walked away. But now someone else. One more ghost. One more piece of the story breathing again. Marco leaned in. "You know that voice?" "Yes," she breathed. "He flew with me." And with that, everything changed. Over the next days, messages flickered through the static. Elias was alive but hunted. He had been running for years, buried deeper than she had ever been. And now, whoever was stirring the ashes of Darkwing had found his trail too. "They want us erased," Elias' broken voice said through the radio one night. "Not just from files, from existence." "Then we fight," Kylie replied, her voice steady. "Together this time." But even as she said it, fear gnawed at her. Fighting meant being visible. Being visible meant every force, friend, foe, or shadow in between would converge on them. The convergence came sooner than expected. She was in Boston when the call came, not over radio, not in a coded message, but from Harrison herself. The colonel appeared at her apartment door, no uniform this time, just a coat against the rain. "They know about Elias," Harrison said without preamble. "He's on every board, every list. You're tied to him now. If you move, you'll be intercepted. If he moves, he'll be killed. They want closure, Kylie, the kind written in stone." Kylie's chest tightened. "And you, what do you want?" Harrison's eyes softened just for a second. "I want to keep you breathing, but I can't do it if you keep choosing the hardest path." Kylie's jaw locked. Maybe the hardest path is the only one left. The colonel said nothing. She just pressed a file into Kylie's hands. Inside, surveillance photos, Elias, gaunt, older but alive, each shot marked with coordinates. "Find him before they do," Harrison whispered, "or there won't be anything left to fight for." The journey was a blur. Flights, backroads, sleepless nights with Marco watching every shadow. The hunt pulled them east, across borders and landscapes until the air smelled of dust again, until the horizon looked too familiar, until Kylie's stomach turned with the echo of memory. They found Elias in an abandoned outpost, hidden beneath a fractured roof, his body thinner, his eyes older, but still burning with the stubborn light she remembered. When he saw her, he froze. Then, with a voice cracked by years, he said, "I thought you were dead." Kylie's throat closed. She wanted to say the same. She wanted to say everything at once. Instead, she just stepped forward, gripped his hand, and whispered, "We survived. That has to mean something." But survival drew attention. The attack came the next night. Not soldiers in uniform, not an official strike. Shadows with rifles, precision in their movements, silence in their advance. Not government, contractors. The kind who erased problems without leaving flags behind. Kylie, Elias, and Marco barely escaped through the desert night, their path lit only by the pale glow of stars. Every breath burned, every step a reminder that ghosts didn't get to rest. At dawn, they found shelter in an old hangar, broken roof, rusted beams, but walls enough to pause. Marco sealed the doors. Elias slumped against the wall, coughing. Kylie crouched beside him, her mind racing. "They won't stop," Elias rasped. "I know," she said. "Then what's the point?" His voice was bitter, cracked. "We'll keep running until we fall." Kylie stared at him, at the man she had thought dead, at the comrade who had carried the same ghost she did. And she realized, running had never been the answer. The point wasn't to hide. The point was to prove they had lived. She rose, her hand steady now. "We don't run, we make them see. We show them we're not shadows to erase." Elias looked at her, eyes weary, but in them a flicker. The same flicker that had carried them through fire once before. Marco stepped forward, his voice low. "Then we send a message." The radio crackled to life that night. Not with whispers, not with codes, but with her voice, steady, resolute. "This is Captain Kylie Rogers. To those who call me Valkyrie 6, I survived. We survived. You tried to bury us. You failed. The desert remembers, and so do we." Silence followed. The kind of silence that stretched across airwaves, across continents, into boardrooms and bunkers where men and women froze, hearing the name they thought was gone. Harrison would hear it. Adler would hear it. Enemies who had waited for closure would hear it. Allies who had buried the truth would hear it. And in that silence, Kylie felt something shift. Not victory, not safety, but dignity. Because survival wasn't just about breathing. It was about refusing to let others define the meaning of your breath. The strike teams never came that night. Maybe the message gave pause. Maybe it sparked chaos in the chains of command. Maybe it bought time. But as dawn lit the desert, Kylie stood outside the hangar, the horizon wide and unforgiving, and felt something she hadn't in years. Not safety, not peace, but purpose. Elias joined her, his voice rough. So what now? She watched the sun rise, its light washing the scars of the earth. She thought of passengers applauding, of her hands on the yoke, of every ghost she carried. Now we keep flying, she said. Not for them, not for the past, for the lives still ahead of us. Elias nodded slowly. Marco said nothing, but his quiet smile spoke enough. And in that moment, Kylie knew the truth. She couldn't bury Valkyrie. She didn't have to. Valkyrie wasn't a call sign meant to chain her. It was a reminder. That survival had meaning. That resilience was its own kind of defiance. That ghosts didn't just haunt sometimes, they protected. The world would never know the full story. Passengers would remember only the calm captain who landed them safely. Officials would file reports that blurred the edges of truth. Enemies would wonder, allies would whisper, and files would gather dust again. But she knew, and Elias knew, and that was enough. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And Captain Kylie Rogers, Valkyrie 6, acted by living.